Welcome everybody. I'm absolutely blown away by the number of people on today's webinar. I thought everybody be feeling a little bit blue after Christmas and being a little bit humbug about it, but not at all. Brilliant. Glad to see so many people today. Anyway, just want to set the scene for today's webinar. This webinar is a more strategic session about what you need to consider to be successful with Microsoft Voice. Now in the webinar, I'll share lots of insight from our real world deployments and bring you up to date or to speed with the very latest innovations in Microsoft Voice, such as the new calling app, how Microsoft have integrated calling queues into Teams channels, and the survivable branch appliances. So let's crack on. So let's start by taking a quick look at the agenda. Now we're going to start with talking about the Teams phone system, what it is, what it does, and how the features work. We'll spend time discussing PSTN connectivity because this really is your biggest decision point when it comes to Teams telephony. The big question is, do you go down the path of Microsoft Teams, Microsoft calling plans, or direct routing? There are so many flavors of direct routing and options out there, so we'll take a look at that. We'll talk about compliance call recording, which has proven in the last 12 months to be a big factor for our highly regulated customers. We're going to touch upon devices where you might have your old Skype phones, newer team phones, and we have SIP phones coming along as well. And we'll look at the ongoing management, reporting and operations. And finally, I'm going to share with you some deployment tips and best practices we've built up over time. I just want to start by doing a quick recap on what Microsoft Teams phone system is. There are so many people who use Teams all day, every day, and have no idea that Teams can be a real phone system with real phone numbers that allow you to make and receive PSTN phone calls. They don't know it could be a soft phone or that there are traditional physical Teams desk phones that work independently of a PC that can make and receive phone calls. Now, Microsoft Voice works wherever you work and whatever device you work on, be that your PC, your smartphone or your desk phone. And it uses the Microsoft Cloud to deliver very reliable, high quality audio services, guaranteeing 99.9% uptime on business voice. Now you can use either your own PSTN carrier like BT or Pure IP, or you can buy calling plans from Microsoft. Now in terms of licensing, there are plans available for both enterprise and small businesses. And finally, it also delivers the PABX type centralized features like auto attendant and call queues, which we'll walk through a little bit later. To use Microsoft Teams for all your voice requirements, you'll need a phone system license. Now with E5 it is bundled in, and for E3 it comes as an add-on. You'll also need the PSTN connectivity capability, so you'll need either a Microsoft calling plan or a direct routing option. For the sub 300 user organizations, there's a license called Business Voice, which bundles in PSTN audio conferencing, phone system and a calling plan. But again, you could opt out and go for direct routing rather than taking a Microsoft calling plan. Let's look at Microsoft's offering in the space of PSTN connectivity. Now, Microsoft now provides calling plans for 16 countries with more to follow in 2021. There are various plans you can see on the right hand side. For example, MCP PSTN 1 and 2 are the more typical, most popular ones you'll see being used. There are also 120 and 240 minutes ones which are more suited for enterprise organizations where you're buying lots of licenses per user. What you'll notice is each license has a bundle of minutes. So for example, PSTN 2 has 1200 domestic and 600 international minutes a month. From a company perspective, if you buy 3 sets of PSTN 2, that means you've got a bucket of 3,600 domestic and 1,800 international minutes available to you. So any user could go above their individual plan limit. This is treated as a bucket of minutes at a tenant level. Now, Microsoft calling plans operate very much like a mobile phone type of model. And like with mobile phone contracts, when you've used up all your minutes before the month end, you need a means of topping up. Now this is where comms credits or communication credits come in very useful. So you might use communication credits as your buffer if you want to avoid calling, for example, to suddenly end if you've used up your monthly allowance. Now essentially, comms credits is a bucket of prepaid additional minutes. And also, if the bulk of calling is domestic, then it makes sense to purchase domestic only calling plans and use credits for those minimal number of international calls you've got to make. Now this slide isn't an exhaustive list of the voice functionality you'll find within Microsoft Voice, but it highlights some of the functionality you'd expect from a traditional phone system. For example, the ability to put calls on hold, transfer them or park calls. You've also got a rich set of call queue configuration options, for example, round robin capabilities, where it'll give all your agents an equal distribution of calls or direct a call to whoever's been available for the longest, for example. Now, if you find that somebody has been on hold for over 3 minutes, for example, you can trip that call over to an auto attendant. That could either be a completely automated bot, or it may trip over to a specific person who handles overflow calls. So there are many different ways to configure Microsoft Voice dependent on the way your business operates. Now let's take a look at Microsoft's new calling app, the new user experience you should expect. Now Microsoft have completely rebuilt the calling experience in Teams that focuses it on being a hub for all your personal calling needs, simplifying it so you can see all your calling activities, contacts, calling history and voicemail on a single screen. Now it's designed to allow Microsoft Teams to more easily replace your desk phone with built-in spam call protection, reverse number lookup, and the ability to merge calls, for example. And finally, Microsoft is also bringing CarPlay support to Microsoft Teams. Now this will allow cars with built-in CarPlay to control Teams calls using Siri. Now let's jump straight into a quick demo of this new calling app experience. So let's take a look at the new calling app, starting with a dial pad where I can type a PSTN phone number or a name of somebody who is in my organization via the global address list. I can also initiate a group call, and if I have delegation enabled, a call on behalf of the people that I support. I can also edit the pills in the dial pad and initiate the call directly from the call button. In the call table, you can see immediately the call history has been updated. And there's a new right-hand summary pane which shows specific metadata about the call, providing easy access point for chat. We also have additional call filtering mechanisms in the history table, which allows us to filter by call type as well as voicemail. There's also support for searching for an individual call history record by number or by name. And here we have a voicemail experience where we can see a previous voicemail left by a caller. We can play inline, get the visual voicemail transcript if it's available, and adjust the speed of the voicemail playback. We also have additional speed dial capabilities and one click to dial for any contact in your speed dial. Finally, back to the left-hand side, we have additional call capabilities around call park, as well as call forwarding and call device settings. Let's highlight some other new features Microsoft have recently launched. Microsoft have also added call recording, transcription, and live captions, just like you see in your Teams meetings. After the call is finished, a transcription is available for review, even if you've missed that call. Microsoft Teams users will also be able to transfer calls between mobile and desktops soon, allowing people to quickly move locations in the middle of an audio or video call. And the one I'm particularly excited about is the ability to add another device to an existing call. This is useful for sharing and viewing content from the second device while audio and or video is on the primary device. Imagine the scenario: you've got your tablet on your left, and you've got your phone on your right hand side. Your phone is handling the audio, while your tablet on the left hand side is getting the slides. Just adds increased flexibility and really improves that kind of remote working experience. In this section of the webinar, I want to introduce the new collaborative calling feature within Microsoft Voice. But before that, it's important to set the context and introduce auto attendance and call queues, which allow your customers to effectively navigate your business and quickly get to the right department or person. Once we've done that, we'll get straight into the new collaborative calling feature recently launched by Microsoft. So let's start by demonstrating the rich capabilities of the two key features of auto attendance and call queues. Now, this diagram represents how people will engage with your business, allowing callers to get to the right people or department. Now, in the red boxes, we have the auto attendance. These represent the options you get when you first call, leading you onto a specific call queue. You also have the ability to nest call queues and auto attendance, as you can see here. In this case, if I press or say to, it will take me to another auto attendant, allowing you to choose from another set of options. So let's get into the Office 365 Admin Center to see how we set this profile up of the auto attendance, the call flows, the call queues, etc. Let's start by looking at how we might set up the receptionist's call queue. Now, jumping straight into call answering, you have two options. You can have an individual answering the call or a distribution group. Most importantly, we have different routing methods to determine how those calls get answered. Option 1, with auto attendant routing, all agents get called at the same time, and the first person to pick up the call gets that call. Then we've got serial routing of calls. Serial routing calls agents one by one from the beginning of a list. And with round robin, agents get the same number of calls from the queue. We also have presence-based routing. With this turned on, agents will receive calls only when their presence states they are available. Agents can also opt out from taking calls. Moving on to call overflow handling, the maximum number of calls in a queue at once is set for 200. But once the maximum number has been reached, you can redirect that call to another call queue or auto attendant. With call timeout handling, again, there is a maximum, it's set for 45 minutes. And when the maximum time has been reached, the call times out, and then it's redirected to a specific person in the organization or another call queue or auto attendant. Straight into time zone, you can see your business hours and non-business hours. You can also set your language. You can also enable voice inputs, which allows the user to speak to the auto attendant and for the auto attendant to direct the user to the correct call queue. For the call flow for auto attendant, firstly, you can have it play a custom message, or you can type in a greeting message which will be read out automatically. Then you can route that call to play some menu options or direct it straight to a call queue. With the greeting option, you can type a greeting message, and those will be directly linked with the dial key options. So as you can see, if we take 0, for example, if you press 0 or say reception, it will take you to the reception call queue. You've also got directory search. You can dial by name or by extension. So that again uses the voice command to say a specific name, and it'll pull that specific person. So next you have the option to set up your business hours from Monday to Sunday. For out of hours, you can have a greeting message played, and it will then route your call through to a voicemail. You can turn transcriptions on, so whenever a voicemail comes through, it'll be transcribed word for word, depending obviously on the quality of the message. You also have the scope for directory search. You have the option to include or exclude specific users. For example, you wouldn't want to include the chief exec. The next new feature I want to talk about is collaborative calling. It is a simple call queue experience built into a Microsoft Teams channel. On the one side, you have a call queue, and on the other side is the collaboration experience you get with a Teams channel. That means the agents can work together inside the channel where they'll have great features like the shared call queue log, which allows agents as well as managers to examine the history of all calls that have come into that queue. You also have a shared voicemail queue. So if a voicemail is left, any agent can pick it up and deal with it. Now on the right-hand canvas, you can also see the status of all the agents. It also allows individual agents to tag themselves as available or not. Now let's take a look at what it takes to provision this collaborative calling experience. Today, a Teams admin needs to go to the admin center to provision a call queue. And in this example, we'll assume that the admin has already provisioned a call queue with the appropriate resource accounts and so on. Now, if we look closely at the call answering section, you'll see that there's both a manual and automatic process that has been introduced. The traditional process of adding agents to a call queue has been a manual one based on per user or per group process. But with the new collaborative calling, we can link the channel to the call queue such that the members who are part of the channel will be directly synced as members of the call queue. There'll be no more worrying about manually maintaining the membership of the call queue. Instead, the membership is synced directly with the membership of the channel. And now that we've saved that, we can see in our configuration that this membership has been updated and this call queue now is directly synced to that particular channel. So what does that look like? Let's do a demo of collaborative calling. If we go to the channel, there is a new calls tab which surfaces this collaborative calling experience. The shared history and voicemail table now shows the individual agent who has picked up a call, and we also have a dial pad for outbound calling with dynamic caller ID. We also have the individual agent's ability to opt in or opt out of taking a call in the queue, and we can see the status for all the other agents who are currently a member of this call queue. We're also able to receive a call into the call queue, and as we wait for this call to connect, we can see that this will update the call history of the queue. And while the call is ongoing, we can collaborate real time with other agents to try and triage the inbound call via the post tab associated with this channel. Okay, let's move on to Survivable branch appliances, which were recently launched by Microsoft at their Ignite conference. If voice is critical to your organization, then a Survivable branch appliance or SBA is an option you should be considering. The new SBA allows you to place and receive PSTN calls even in the event of a WAN outage. Fundamentally, what has happened is that Microsoft have asked all their session board controller partners to add a virtual machine to the SBC, which runs the Microsoft software locally, so providing all the functionality of Microsoft Voice even when you've lost connection to the cloud. So now you'll have the ability to have a local SBC on site that will carry on working should your internet connectivity or access to the Microsoft Cloud fail. It's worth taking note of some interesting opportunities coming down the line with the likes of 5G to split this dependency. On the flip, I'd say with my business hat on, do you really need another local box to maintain and patch? If your office goes down for everything else but stays up for your telephony, how useful is that if your people cannot access their CRM system? Let's discuss PSTN connectivity. I believe this is the big decision you need to make when looking at Teams telephony. Now, you can either buy from Microsoft through what they call their calling plan, or you can use direct routing. And direct routing is bringing your own SBC, your own carrier, and there are lots of different architectural options open to you that you need to consider. So let's discuss why direct routing might be the better approach for your PSTN connectivity. When requirements get more complex and costly from a calling plan perspective, or you require richer integration, organizations might be better served by using a direct routing solution. Direct routing opens up a lot of architectural options, and the benefits are pretty easy to understand. Let's start with global coverage. Microsoft calling plans only cover, at the moment, 16 countries. If you have countries you need to cover outside those 16, then direct routing is your option. You might also need functionality not included in Microsoft Voice, such as richer contact center capabilities, or integration with third-party CRM systems such as Salesforce, where you want to be able to do screen popping of the caller's details while passing the call through to Teams to be picked up by the agent. If you take the direct routing approach, users will still make calls using the Teams app on the desktop or smartphone, keeping Teams as that center of user experience. Anytime you click on a number that is outside your Teams environment, it'll be handed off seamlessly to the telephony provider. Finally, don't forget, from a licensing perspective, you'll still need the Microsoft phone system license. Let's talk about compliance recording. Compliance recording is a real big requirement for lots of our customers that have an absolute legal responsibility to record peer-to-peer calls, PSTN calls, and also meetings. There are a lot of vendors out there that are certified, some of which you can see on this slide. You can have it as a SaaS-based service or dedicated to yourself, hosted in Azure, for example. The solutions offered are all server-side, so no plugins required. So they'll work across any end-user device in the office or when you're working from home. Let's move on to reporting. When you're up and running, it is really important to understand who's using Microsoft Voice and how they're using it. Now, Teams Admin Center has some great reports. The Office 365 portal now includes, for example, a minute-by-minute usage report. The call quality dashboard has some Power BI usage reports as well. And of course, you can look at your Teams billing or call logging. A tip, make sure you have a handle on what your telephony usage was before the migration to Microsoft Voice. Don't be surprised if you see some drop off because previously users might have been dialing into internal meetings or using their phone to make one-to-one calls with colleagues. And now they're flipped to either using VoIP, which obviously you can report on, or they've started to schedule Teams meeting. But if your PSTN usage has dropped off a cliff, odds are everybody's flipped to using their mobiles. So let's move on to devices. You obviously have the USB headset option, and there's a wide range of certified options available in the market, for example, in-ear, over-ear, Bluetooth, DECT, whatever. But don't cheap out on them because people are using them all day, every day, because they're living in Teams. You've also got the option of Teams IP phones where the hardware comes from the vendor and the software is provided by Microsoft, allowing the user experience to be consistent while the hardware layer will differ by vendor. They're all PoE, so they'll be automatically updated by the Teams service. There's also some USB Teams phones, which look like a phone, but essentially have a USB cable. Some people like that from a form factor perspective. Everything being equal, I'd push for headsets for everyone and only go for a desk phone as a last resort. Now I want to slow down and go over best practices we've learned the hard way in moving many of our clients onto Microsoft Voice. Number one, first off, know how your phone system is being used today. Look at the configuration, look at the billing, look at who the active users are versus the enabled users. Look at which users have the most esoteric features enabled and challenge them if they use them. You'll be surprised how little they're being used and how stale the configuration has become. That will give you an interesting scope of how big your use case is for real telephony. Looking at your bill will allow you to identify your power users. Make these people your best friends if you want a successful migration. Obviously, the bill only shows the calls you're paying for, not necessarily the inbound calls. So if you can, gather more information on your inbound calls, which will help you avoid any nasty surprises down the line in terms of configuration. Number 2, when you're moving to Teams telephony, I'd really recommend starting with an easy group, and don't start with your senior leadership team. Don't ever start with your chief exec or the PA to your chief exec. Number 3, if the business has a high expectation of telephony and has a dedicated VLAN, uses Cisco IP phones, etc., then make sure you think very carefully before you throw it out over the internet. Just make sure your network and internet connectivity is ready for it. For example, upgrade, if possible, if it makes commercial sense, upgrade your internet connectivity to fiber. If you have an older firewall or router and you start pushing your voice traffic down it, it'll have a major impact on the quality of calls you'll be making or receiving. So make sure your firewalls and routers are not old and creaky. Same with the LAN switches. And ideally, prioritize the voice protocols over the internet and LAN connections. You don't need separate VLANs for your voice, but make sure you prioritize your voice traffic over your network. Number 4, from our experience, it's best to roll out and enable new telephony features in Office 365 over the weekend, because it can take up to 24 hours for a feature to be enabled. Number 5, use the Teams desktop app on newer computers. You might have taken the plunge and gone with Microsoft Voice, but it's not great if you have a 5 or 6 year old computer, even if it runs Windows 10. You really want to have newer computers. It's better for the user's productivity. And when I say newer, it only needs to be something that's 2 or 3 years old. Number 6, we're all spending so much more of our time in video meetings and calling that makes me draw upon the old adage of buy once, buy well. So my recommendation is to invest in a good quality headset like a Jabra headset. Number 7, our internet lines are so reliable these days. When was the last time your internet line went down? So there's no need to invest in lots of redundancy. Just load up your Teams mobile app as a backup on your smartphone. If the office internet goes down, just switch to using your mobile app over 4G until the internet comes back. And finally, number 8, training. In my experience, people like knowing stuff. They don't like learning stuff. But the good news about Microsoft Teams and Teams Voice, it's not complicated. You're probably talking about no more than 20-30 minutes of training for your users for them to get to know Teams. But make sure you plan in that user training for them. Wow, there's so much we've covered today in terms of positioning Microsoft Voice as the alternative to your traditional PBX requirements. We also looked at the new features such as new calling app, collaborative calling, where we see Microsoft integrating calling with the collaborative capabilities available in Teams and channels. And finally, the Survivable branch appliance, which is a solution for those organizations that cannot afford downtime. Now let's take a quick look at how we might help you at a practical level. Now, if you plan on migrating from your current PBX to Microsoft Teams, the big question is how you're going to do that. Now, our Microsoft Teams telephony assessment maps the configuration of your existing PBX into Microsoft Teams. Through understanding your business requirements, we'll create a plan that includes 1, a feature parity map of what you've got that must be available in Microsoft Voice. 2, a migration project plan for Microsoft Teams phone system. And finally, a summary of all the costs, be they license, service plans, calling plans, devices, and engineering time required to get this off the ground. So that's it. I hope today was of value. And if the timing is right, then perhaps the Teams voice assessment might be the perfect next step. But if it isn't, not a problem. We run monthly webinars on what is new and strategic in terms of how you can improve your organizational productivity using Microsoft 365 and Teams. So watch this space for February's webinar. And that leaves me just to say, simply stay safe, roll on the vaccination, and have a great day. Cheers, goodbye.